Yeah, it's kind of crazy how a game from 17 years ago can still elicit all the same emotions and bring back so many great memories. I think when you look at what was going on, obviously, with Ohio State against Miami in the national championship game from obviously that time. And I think for a lot of Ohio State fans, a chance to go back and remember where they were in their lives at that time. And many of them, as you could tell from the broadcast, about 60,000 of them were at the game, 77,000 seat stadium. It seemed to me from being there that Miami may have only had 5,000 or 6,000 people there. In my 20, well, really, I've been going to games pretty consistently since about 86 or 87. That's 33 years. That's the most tension-filled moment I can ever recall following Ohio State is the Miami game. And the reason was because it had been 34 years since Ohio State had won the national championship since 1968. Miami had won 34 straight games, and it was almost considered a mountain that was not scalable. I always tell this story, and this is just the funniest thing to me, is Kirk Herbstreit and Joey Galloway were a thing in 2003, just as they are today. All these many years later, they're still at the forefront of the discussion on ESPN about college football. And they had Randall Hill from Miami on the set with them, former Miami player, before the game. And Randall Hill says, I like you guys. I'm going to take it easy on you. I'm going to say Miami 37, Ohio State 12. And Joey Galloway says 12, and then Herbstreit goes, that doesn't sound like you're taking it too easy on my boys here. And Randall Hill kind of like rising out of his chair, and you can hear his high pitch. I'm giving you 12, baby. So that was the kind of world that we were living in 2002, 2003, that nobody thought Ohio State had a chance to win that game.
I don't remember exactly what Herbstreit had to say, but it was something to the fact when he made his prediction, and I didn't watch that part of the game broadcast last night, that I remember him predicting Ohio State would win, and he just had a feeling about how close this team was, what Tressel had going, that they would just fight to the death and be able to pull it out. And he said, beyond logic, I'm predicting Ohio State to win this game. Kevin, your thoughts?
Yeah, this game fell during a couple of years that I was actually out of Columbus. I was working in Dallas, so I did not get to cover this game. I think everybody I worked with assumed that I was going to be at it, but it just didn't end up happening. But there weren't a lot of people picking Ohio State to win this game. I mean, we'd seen Ohio State roll some great teams out in the 90s, and they weren't able to get across the finish line. It'd been a long time since Ohio State had won a championship. So there were a lot of people that were saying, even as talented as Ohio State was, they were going to have no opportunity against this Miami team, a team that just obliterated Nebraska a year before. Larry Coker comes in, inherits this great team filled with all this talent. One thing that I definitely remember from watching the game yesterday was just how great of a player Sean Taylor was. I mean, just seeing him out there, he was a freak. But on the other side, Will Smith for Ohio State, two guys who got taken from us way too quickly. It was really weird seeing them both out there in that game. But I remember being in Dallas amongst a bunch of people who didn't care one way or the other, to be quite honest. They just wanted to see a good game, and nobody really was, outside of people who had direct Ohio State ties, were giving the Buckeyes much of a chance. And then lo and behold, a little flyer comes out for Miami's national championship party that comes out before the game. Players get a hold of that. Dustin Fox has told plenty of stories about that, as well as other players on that team. If you needed to put any more fuel in their tanks, that certainly did it. And they came out and did things that people said that nobody could do against Miami. Ken Dorsey's not going to make mistakes. He made mistakes. They're not going to be able to sack Miami. They sacked Miami. This, that, and the other. I mean, let's not forget Maurice Clarett was bottled up for much of the game, but still found the end zone a couple of times. But it was Craig Krenzel, the runner, that really was the one who was able to to chunk up the yardage. It wasn't their freshman All-American Reese that was able to do it. So, that game is going to be one of those situations that's going to tie Buckeye fans together of a certain generation and older. Where were you when you watched that 03 game?
It's funny that we watch this thing, and we can watch it any time. Just clicking on YouTube, we can watch the game, but it takes a national broadcast. It kind of galvanizes everyone and brings them together to discuss what happened. So, Steve, I know you got a lot more to say. I would be interested to know from both of you if there's anything that struck you last night that you thought, man, I forgot about that, or that's just an interesting or different way to look at it now that I'm removed 18 years.
Well, yeah, I'll start with, Miami. I don't think people fully understand. Miami had been one of the top programs in college football in the late 80s, the mid to late 80s. Had a couple good teams in the 90s that were very competitive, particularly the early 90s. They're very competitive. Had fallen off a little bit, and Butch Davis, I think, had been the coach there for a little while. And then he left. I think he left to go to the NFL, and it left Larry Coker to take it over. And Larry Coker had not lost yet as the head coach at Miami. They had won 34 straight games. And yet, as I could tell about the 1st of November where things were headed, that Ohio State was going to play Miami. If both were undefeated, I don't know if they were the only two undefeated, certainly the only two major conference teams that were undefeated. There might have been Boise or somebody, or a TCU in the under group that may have been undefeated as well. I don't recall, but without looking it up real quick. But what struck me was, as I watched Miami and taped a couple of the games on VHS in 2003 for future study, I wasn't even burning these games to DVDs yet to study them. I was doing it the old-fashioned way on VHS, and I actually had a clicker on my VHS that would run the tape ahead 25 or 30 seconds. So I could cut out the time in between plays by hitting that little button, and I could watch like an entire game in a little over an hour or something with that handy-dandy button. But at any rate, what got me, first of all, they went to Syracuse. Andre Johnson just had some kind of a game up there. They won the game 49-7, and he was just dominant. I mean, whatever he was, 6'3", 220, and he played every bit of it. He's just a monster. And then the following week, they came back home, and their last home game was against Virginia Tech in the Big East, and they won the game 56-45. And I don't know a lot of the details other than their defense gave up 45 points. And when I saw that, I was like, well, Ohio State's offense may not be the most potent in the country, but I wonder if Virginia Tech could put up 45 against Miami, if Ohio State could get it into the 20s, 23, 24, and maybe in the game in the fourth quarter. And as it turned out, it was 17-17 at the end of regulation play. So I looked at it that it was just a case there where Ohio State's defense, if they could hold down Miami, could be in that game. And I did predict Ohio State to win 27-24. The Miami Herald reporter who was in Scottsdale at the pregame festivities pulled 46 people, and they ran a little box in the Miami Herald, and somebody sent a picture or sent a copy of the paper to me, their big preview of the game. And I was one of 5 people, William Roden from the New York Times, Tim May from the Columbus Dispatch, who, it shall be noted, also picked Buster Douglas to beat Mike Tyson before that happened. And he covered the fight in Tokyo. A guy named Sean Dunster, who was a cameraman for a Cincinnati TV station. And then I think some guy from Kansas City may have been the 5th guy who picked Ohio State to beat Miami. The other 41 picked Miami. And Tim Brando from CBS said it would be 48-10. So, again, all that just sets the stage for what was one of the biggest upsets, one of the greatest games. People say that the USC-Texas game eclipsed that a couple of years later. And maybe from a national standpoint, maybe people will think that. But I think Ohio State and Miami was a better game, had the drama of going to overtime. and so many guys, 20-some guys on both sides played in the NFL. It's hard to find a better college football game than the one they replayed last night.
I was in 9th place in a bowl pool prior to that game, and that vaulted me to the top because the first 8 people, of course, picked Miami. Tony decided to join us. Good to see you.
And did you have a good feeling going into that night that you had a shot, or what did you? I mean, obviously they needed to win the game.
Bias in my selection, but I also truly believe that Ohio State had a legitimate shot to win the game. Yes.
That's funny. That's like having Butler in your March Madness pool against Duke, and if Butler pulls it off, you win the $2,000 or whatever. I'm in one at Children's Hospital every year here in Columbus, where the top prize is usually between $2,000 and $3,000 for a March Madness pool, and they have 400 or 500 entries. I think I got as high as 6th or 7th one year and cashed out pretty good, but I'm waiting for that day when I get down to the last game and I'm in contention for the big money. That'd be a lot of fun.
Tony, what hit you last night that maybe you forgot about?
Anything
like that?
I don't know if there's anything I had forgotten about. The thing that really still sticks out to me is how impressive Miami's defense was against Maurice Clarett. Nobody had stopped him like that, held him to 2 yards a carry, and he was still able to make the first guy miss, but the second and third and fourth guy was there, and just really incredible how good a job they did. Craig Krenzel's toughness still is amazing to watch in that game because he got blasted and pounded relentlessly and still rushed for 80-some yards. And that game was kind of the epitome of Craig Krenzel. Was never pretty, but it was effective. And even in 2003, when you're expecting this Craig Krenzel to come out slinging the ball and now he's going to be this and that and he's going to be so good, it was no, he was still just Craig Krenzel. He's as liable to go 7 for 21 as he is, 12 for 17 or something like that. But that game, I still think that had Willis McGahee not gone down, because he was starting to pick up some momentum. So that was obviously a key turning point. And I think Steve tweeted last night the Simon Frazier sack at the end there when, if Ohio State hits that field goal to make it 6 points, now you're giving Miami the need for them to go on 4th down and to get an extra down. And so when Ohio State is still up by 3 late in the game, instead of 6, Miami can settle for a field goal. And Simon Frazier on that drive knocks them kind of out of a situation where they might think about going for it on 4th down. So just the little things, like if you change anything, you might change everything. And so the things happened as they needed to for Ohio State to win. But the defensive line just opening up and destroying Miami up front. You know what stood out the most? Brett Romberg's comments. And I don't know if you guys have talked about this yet, where he's doing the stream last night and saying that it wasn't the Ohio State players, it was the coaching. It was the game planning by the coaches, and that's what he had respect for, not so much the players. And I mean, you're talking about guys like Tim Anderson and David Patterson and Kenny Peterson just beating him up left and right, and that wasn't Jim Haycock doing that.
If you noticed, I changed the backdrop. That's the cover of the book I wrote about the game. I don't have any of the books left, unfortunately, but it was kind of neat. I wrote the book in 2005, 2 years after the game had been played in the summer of 2005. And what that extra year gave me was a chance to talk to as many different guys who played in the game as possible on even both sides, Miami and Ohio State, to really delve into what happened. One thing I'll throw in is just the utter physicality of this game. And you talked about Clarett, Tony. I remember a play down near the goal line where it appeared they ran an option play to Clarett, and he took a pitch going to the sideline, and he gets smacked out of bounds. And it wasn't just one green jersey. It was like 5 of them eliminated him with extreme prejudice. Let me just tell you, the hitting that was going on that field was amazing. And whenever the topic would come up with Jim Tressel about a playoff or an extra game, which we now have, he said, whoa, I tell you, that game we played against Miami, I don't know if we'd been able to get back up to play another game so soon after that, because it was a sledgehammer type game, to borrow an Urban Meyer comment as well. So it was like an NFL game, because I used to go down the sidelines to a lot of Bengals and Browns games back when I was working at a daily paper, and the hitting was just stunning sometimes, what you'd see at an NFL game, and it doesn't really convey as much at home, but certainly this game had that as well.
You know, we talk about what was at times an inept Ohio State passing attack, but when they truly needed it, 4th and 14, if anyone on the Miami side of things want to go to other plays, the most obvious to blame a loss, how a defensive back doesn't lock down a wide receiver right at the chains and not get backed up another 5 yards to give that kind of cushion. It's not like they're sitting at their own 20-yard line. There's nothing to defend. It's 4th and 14. There's the yard marker right there. That's the first down. Defend it. And Michael Jenkins got that separation, and that was a perfectly executed play. The line blocked perfectly when they had some leaks, and Krenzel was in trouble most of the time. But on that particular play, it was picture perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all talk about the holding, pass interference in the end zone on that final drive in overtime, but nobody really talks about that the play, the 4th and 14. You know, we all know it's there. I think it's taken for granted in some instances, but you know, that's one of the most clutch plays that I can remember. And you know, I guess we're talking 2 decades now. I mean, just the wherewithal to be able to make that play. I mean, you know, there were not a lot of passes through Craig Krenzel's career at Ohio State that we're going to circle. Holy Buckeye, that one. Kind of struggling for a lot more at this point. Those are the 2 that really stand out. But I was doing a live chat over at Buckeye Grove, watching the game as if it were a live game, and I did note on that we don't talk about this play enough in terms of what it meant, because without that, I mean, the game's over. There, you know, nobody knows the name Terry Porter or anybody like that at that point.
You know, Mark, you're asking why would the guy bail? Why would the defender bail like that? Maybe because Michael Jenkins is the guy who caught Holy Buckeye on 4th down against Purdue, and he knew that this is something that Ohio State has done in the past. They're okay going deep on one play to save the game, and so he kind of cheated a little bit and definitely got burned for it.
I was going to throw in something about that 4th and 14 play. The one thing that the DBs unfortunately don't have the advantage of, that we as the viewer at home, is that yellow line on the field, to where, you know, you look over before the play where that first down marker is, but you know, when you're trying to man-to-man cover a wide receiver, you may lose track of that landmark sometimes, and I think that is one more element for a DB to try and take care of during a tough play like that. But some people will say he shoved off a little bit. Maybe he did. It's obvious the officials may have missed a call along the sideline with about 1:40 to go. Gamble makes a catch on the sideline. The official immediately comes in and waves it incomplete, and he may have gotten a foot down in bounds. If that happens, Ohio State can take the clock all the way down inside of a minute before they would have had to punt the ball back to Miami if they don't get another first down. So it kind of cuts both ways, the calls and the things everybody makes on about the pass interference. One other thing I'll throw in, I just grabbed my encyclopedia. It looks like 2003 was the last year Miami was in the Big East, and it looks like maybe they and Virginia Tech moved on to the ACC in 2004, perhaps. So they continued playing Virginia Tech after that. So I assume they both moved around the same time. My brain has gone foggy on all those move-ins. But what's crazy to me is how great the Miami program was. National championships, late 80s, early 90s, 2001, over 3 different decades. They won or were in the race for the championship. And since they joined, I assume they won several Big East Conference championships while that was still alive. That goes without saying, obviously. But since they moved to the ACC in 2004, it appears, I can't recall one season where they've won the ACC championship. And in a lot of respects, people point to this Ohio State game as the beginning of the end for the once heralded Miami football program. They have never really been in the forefront of college football for the last 17 seasons since that day. And, maybe a top 10 rankings, a random one here or there. But Ohio State ended Miami, it seems, for all intents and purposes on that night.
Steve, I've got the numbers fresh in my head. I posted a video on this a couple months ago addressing Miami's elite status in college football. They're a 57% winning percentage team in the last 15 to 16 years. They haven't won an ACC championship. They've gone to the conference championship game once. There have been 43 teams finish in the AP top 10 in the last 16 years. They are not one of them.
Wow. And just think how great that program was. And they've gone through several coaches. I mean, they got rid of Coker within a year or two after that, I believe. And, it's been a shuttling of coaches through there over the last 15 years. JBL, Al Golden was there for a while. I don't know. It got a little ridiculous, I think, at times. Did they go back to Howard Schnellenberger even at one point?
Butch Davis.
They did not. Butch Davis,
They went back to Butch Davis.
They had Randy Shannon in there for a while.
Oh, God.
Mark Richt had a cup of coffee there.
Well, they did not go back to Butch Davis. He never came back.
He'd already been there.
He handed it over to Coker.
Yeah.
But
I'm joking about going back to Schnellenberger, but yeah, it was they've tried a lot of different approaches, and maybe they're on the right track now. I don't know, but there's a lot of people that think they could be a top 25 team this year.
Speaking of Krenzel, I saw a tweet that was critical of Krenzel and supportive of Ken Dorsey. And, you could split hairs in analyzing them as quarterbacks. I'm not talking about statistically. Obviously, Miami was more of a passing team. He had great weapons. So did Krenzel. But I'm not comparing them as collegiate quarterbacks and what they produce collegiately. But this was more on an NFL level. And I said, you know what? I think it's pretty comparable. And now that I look at it, I didn't choose to look it up, but I said Krenzel had pretty much the same career as Ken Dorsey, meaning not much of a career in the NFL, actually more so than I thought he would. I never thought he'd take a snap at the next level. And actually, Ken Dorsey had 13 starts and only won 2 of them, and Craig Krenzel was at least 3-2 in the NFL as a starter.
And that was as a rookie with the Bears. I am a Bears fan, but I was more of a Bears fan then, and getting to watch, I assume that was 2004 because I think he was a 5th-round draft pick, and of being a Bears quarterback, 3 guys ahead of him, I think probably all got injured, and then he was thrust in there and somehow did what he did and was able to win games on a bad team, and then that was it. Just the one season pretty much where he played.
And not to dwell on the gamble play that Steve brought up, but it was the final Ohio State offensive drive of regulation. And you don't get a feel for in the cut-down version of the game because they just kind of moved on. You heard Fouts say, I don't know, he might have caught that. And then they kind of cut to the next play. But there was replay after replay, and there was and I remember Fouts particularly saying, he caught that ball, and I thought he caught the ball. Also, his jersey was held coming out of the break, so it could have been called interference. He did catch the football. It would have been a first down. If anything, even if they go 3 and out on the next series, they've got another 8 to 10 yards to punt downfield. You don't know what would have happened in that punt situation. And, of course, the time would have been collapsed significantly.
Just no doubt. Go perish. I mean, Yeah, that was. I remember watching it at a bar in Dallas with the Ohio State Alumni Association there, and when on that punt return, oh my God, the place went nuts. The place, I mean, people, the honeymoon was over for Jim Tressel for that one play. Let me tell you, people were irate.
Yeah, to have the game all but basically won. And, there were that plays another one, the Decleater block on Mike Kudla, that would never stand today. They throw a flag on that. Even though he wasn't hit back, he was almost hit flush. It wouldn't allow that kind of hit today. There were a lot of targeting. We were joking they'd have to stop the game every 3 plays to check for targeting, because that's the way those game was played back then. And, there's a lot about that game that stands out. So many nuances and so many different things. Tension in the overtime periods. I mean, you could cut it with a knife. And Ohio State has to score the second time. In the first overtime, they get the ball the second time, and they have to match Miami's touchdown. Well, they kick the extra point, and there's a false start on the extra point. So now here's Mike Nugent. They move him back 5 yards. He's got to kick it again. There was no problem. He put it right on through. And, if he misses the second attempt because of a penalty and the game ends like that, what kind of a downer would that have been for a national championship to hinge on that? And, just so many little things. The game took 3 hours and 56 minutes to play, and was just an all-time classic.